Cool. All right. We're live, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is call number one for native rollups. So the purpose of this call is, decidedly non-technical. We're going to be talking today about pilling, educational content, further research, and open questions. So the kinds of things that normies are going to ask about, things that we want to agree on. So we're not going to talk too much about definitions today, but we're going to, ideally have some set of definitions, some set of open questions that we can coordinate on. Because although I appreciate, decentralized research, I think it's often helpful to have channels for collaboration set up, even if they don't end up being end up use. So today I have a very short presentation, and I want to make this a very open-ended call. Just get kind of community input. How can we take native rollups from where they are today and ship them to mainnet? Right. That's in the end our goal. To get there, I think we need to convince a few people, obviously write some code, and make some changes to how we think about uh, the social contract that exists in Ethereum. So I'm just going to run through my presentation, and we'll take kind of questions as we go. Uh, yeah, let's let me present. Um, let's see. Cool. Is my screen visible? Cool. All right. So, like I said, we're talking about pilling, educational content, further research, and open questions. I'm not going to spend too long in any of those. Just want to give an overview. So the important thing for native rollups is to actually ship a product, right? These things are useful as research concepts, just like base rollups are. But until we start going to mainnet like Facet and Tycho have for base rollups, then these are just ideas and they're not actually helping real users. And so there's a few, I guess, kind of roles I think we need to convince. The first is Ethereum layer twos. So this is existing layer twos. This is people who are launching new layer twos. This is apps that want to launch their own app chains, so on and so forth, right? And we need to convince them to launch native, right? To become native rollups, or to migrate to being native. So go from existing off-chain execution with fraud proofs or another zk and transition to using native rollups. So that's kind of the goal for Ethereum layer twos. Our progress on this front has been pretty solid so far. We have interest from some major layer two players. We have commitments from my own team Spire, from other kind of development shops to start working on actually making native rollups real, writing the code for that. And so I think we've made a lot of progress on that side. One other area is Ethereum validators. So there's all sorts of validators to talk to, different classes here. We obviously have solid stickers. We have larger node operators. Um, we have to think about, LSTs versus kind of private stickers. And I think um, the goal of specifically Ethereum validators is to convince them to, make the necessary changes to their setup to support native rollups. If that means changing hardware requirements, coordinating with a prover network, deciding which um, kind of zkVM to use or to attest to. There's I guess, a set of things that validators will need to make choices about. And I think the most important of that is related to hard forking Ethereum. So we need to get validators to upgrade their node software to a version of Ethereum that supports native rollups. The third here is Ethereum core devs. So obviously the process for upgrading Ethereum, the EIP process, is controlled by the all core devs calls. And this is how a lot of like prioritization and decision making happens in Ethereum. For this discussion, the key thing for us is to write an EIP, get an EIP into a hard fork, right? I think Fusaka is still reasonable for re-execution. If we limit the scope of the EIP to just an on-chain opcode. But it's very possible that that will happen in the hard fork after Fusaka. And then right here in the middle is, I think, some of the most important actors is the broader Ethereum community, right? So this is ETH bag holders. This is, just the kind of people who listen to the Daily Gwei, right? Ethereum people who are in Ethereum for the tech, for the people, etc., so on and so forth. And Um, usually these people don't take a lot of convincing. Uh, if there's, charismatic, strong leaders that are pushing something, like Justin, for example. And so I don't think this will take too much trouble. But one thing that we saw with base rollups, at least, is that people were like generally in some support of the idea, but had very little, I guess, understanding of what base rollups actually entailed in practice. Um, and so part of the goal with this call is to set up channels to produce educational content for the Ethereum community to learn what are native rollups, what are the impacts, what is it actually going to look like in practice, answering frequently asked questions, things like this, in a way that is hopefully enough to have arrows pointing out from Ethereum community, enough to convince validators, layer twos, and core devs to kind of consider how they can uh, make decisions that are helpful for native rollups. So that's Pilling. Do we have any questions or thoughts on there? Justin, do you want to say a few words?
No, just this all makes sense so far. I'm actually on the bus in the French mountains. I'm about to go skiing tomorrow. So
Oh,
yeah, sorry if I'm not super productive right now.
no problem, no problem. Cool. Okay, let's go to the next slide here. So the talking about educational content again for a second. I think there's a few kind of I have 8 here, but a few categories that we just really want to nail down. And so if I was making a content strategy, I would focus an article or a podcast on each one of these and try to narrow down on each one, explain it for a normie audience. So I'll just kind of walk through them and give a few sentences of kind of what I'm describing roughly. In terms of benefits, we have 4 big ones. Justin outlined 5 in his native rollup post. I think these are the 4 that resonated the most with me. But there's certainly more that could be added here. This is not a comprehensive list by any means. The first one is security. So, to put it simply, we are enshrining the security properties of rollups, at least their AVM execution, into the Ethereum social contract, right? And so if it was possible to hack a native rollup, or a native rollup did get exploited, God forbid, then the security social contract would require that Ethereum hard forks to protect that from happening. And so the I guess the key point about security is that a native rollup designed correctly can be as secure as Ethereum, have the same security assumptions. And a off-chain execution rollup can never achieve that, at least within the kind of local perspective of Ethereum. The second one is composability. So I believe the key property here is that with an execution engine opcode, if you're using that for execution, you can kind of shape and customize your the way that your proving works to actually essentially emulate real-time proving. So because we have off-chain proofs, the validity of an Ethereum block is dependent on the validity of proofs being generated, and therefore it must be possible to generate a valid proof. And so what we're doing is we're kind of building the native rollup proving into the Ethereum block validity. And so the rollup can assume validity of execution of transactions, assume a state transition or a state output, and use that to do all sorts of composability on layer 1. So there's teams working on this. I know Gwyneth showed a super cool demo of doing composability between layer 1 and layer 2, doing a swap between chains. And this is something that would greatly help with that, right? As we try to move towards faster and more secure forms of proving for rollups. The other thing on here is sustained compatibility, and this is roughly the idea that native rollups can maintain compatibility with a layer 1 EVM without upgrading or changing anything else. So I think this is a superpower. Some people might disagree, but the one of the issues with moving to stage 2 today for existing layer 2s is if you ossify the protocol and make some ossifications even beyond stage 2, then your compatibility with Ethereum will disappear if Ethereum execute some breaking chains or some non-breaking chains. That just changes how developers interact with Ethereum, right? And so if random example, Teco decided to ossify their EVM right now, then Ethereum added EOF, then developers on Ethereum would have a different experience than those on Teco. And this leads to all sorts of issues, but mostly it's just a bad developer experience. The fourth one is simplicity. I think this is going to be underappreciated and overappreciated. The nice thing about simplicity is, at least for native rollups, is that spinning up a rollup no longer requires guardians to check for fraud proofs. It doesn't require a network of provers. You're essentially inheriting and reusing the resources that Ethereum has gathered. I believe the same property applies to base sequencing, but it's just using what's already out there to launch a rollup. So I guess the end goal for something like simplicity is to launch a Ethereum-based and native rollup or an ultrasound rollup with just a contract call, right? We can imagine using these for very ephemeral purposes. We can imagine them being long-term, but essentially changing the construction of how rollups get launched. So another thing, another broad category here is what to expect. But before we get to that, I want to hear feedback on benefits, if there's any kind of changes that people would make here, and what are people thinking about the benefits outlined?
I mean, I'll say something quickly. I mean, I think there's absolutely correct. I think if you're talking about educating people, you've got to weight these benefits somehow in terms of what native rollup specifically can provide, because I think there are some like real black and white differences when it comes to something like security. But when it comes to something like sustained compatibility, it's like, well, how big of a deal, actually is that? So I think maybe my only question would be if you had to change the sizes of these to reflect the messaging, how the messaging should go, like what would those sort of sizes be?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think security should definitely be the largest box, take up 50% of this. It is, it's going to accelerate the rollup centric roadmap just by changing the trust assumptions of layer twos. For composability, it's not so much a size as it is like a timeline. We can get faster composability with native rollups or faster secure composability instead of having to rely on like TE proving or something that people would consider less secure. So I think of that as a timeline thing. For sustained compatibility, I believe this is the only way to ossify a execution protocol and still maintain compatibility with Ethereum. And so I think that the premise here is like how important is ossification. I don't have a great answer for that. I think there's good reasons to ossify layer twos, especially when it comes to like security. But something like an exit window can get you a decent bit of the way there. So I might make that a smaller box. And then simplicity is not something I'm sold on yet. I think it's good to have that option, but I'm not sure how much it will be used without some pretty major changes to how we think about like what is a rollup and what is a layer two. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Thank you.
Cool. Any other thoughts here? Any other benefits people are thinking about?
What's the benefit you left out, which didn't resonate with you, just to recall?
Oh, I'm trying to remember. Let me check real quick. It was. Let's see. It was gas cost, right? So Justin outlines that verifying snarks on chain is expensive, and therefore rollups choose to settle infrequently. With something like the execute precompile, you could, you're obviously not verifying snarks on chain, and so the cost could theoretically be lower. Yeah, I don't know how much that could be offset. Obviously by settling more frequently to layer one, you could be paying for DA more. I think to honestly tell how much costs are going to change, like, in terms of bottom line, we're gonna have to actually do some experimentation and, ship some of this stuff.
I mean, on the cost, ultimately, you have to charge for whatever the validator's work is. But the nice thing is that you can do proof aggregation at the layer 1 level, as opposed to having to coordinate L2s to share proof systems and share infrastructure there.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think that's one of the other benefits, I guess, is that you now have a central coordination point for everything you might want to do for proving, for the deproving. Be that, different proof systems, different VMs, and, obviously be that like proof aggregation and some other kind of related things. I think that's going to be, a massive benefit as well. Cool. Anything else?
Yeah, I guess another thing I would say is just, in some sense, right, everyone is trying to choose what to do, trying to choose what to work on, trying to use what rollup, what stack to use. And so I think there is this awkward question about like the comparison. It's like, great, okay, you're secure. Are you more secure? Like there is a big, like, I wouldn't call it like a propaganda apparatus, but like some kind of apparatus around stage 2, right? You're done when you get there. Obviously, you can get to stage 2 without being a native rollup. And so I think if we're going to come out and say, and I really do believe this, that a native rollup stage 2 is like a trillion times more secure than a non-native rollup stage 2, then I think that kind of comparative point needs to be made, because if you're just looking at, you'll say, great, that's another way to get to perfect security, which is what the marketing machine tells me that stage 2 is. So it's tied. And so why do we need a new thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think my takeaway, at least around security, is that you don't automatically get security by being a native rollup. You only get security of your kind of state transition, or some subset of it, perhaps. Depends on how much of the opcode you use and for what. And so if you're using just the pure execute engine opcode for all of your EVM execution, then your security for that part of the rollup is going to be, from the local perspective of Ethereum at least, going to be better than any form of off-chain ZK, any form of fraud proofs, just because of how it's encoded into the social contract, right? After that, I mean, I don't want to take any positions on the whole stage 2 thing. I think there's a I guess a whole lot of risks and security kind of questions that we need to answer for rollups that are not just around state transition, but are around more than that, right? So yeah, I'll leave it there. Cool. Let's go into what to expect. So I think this should be thought of almost like a frequently asked questions for people who see this on their Twitter feed for their first time and want to know, are native rollups just another product of the Ethereum, research heads, or is this something I should care about, right? How is this going to make my experience better? How should I think about this? Is this competing with the layer 2s that I love? Am I going to have to run a prover, right? Things like this. And so what I think we can do about this is just, straightforward, spin up some educational resources, put these on Ethereum.org has a whole directory of Ethereum resources. That could be a good starting point. There's other ways to host resources as well. Happy to kind of support some of those at Spire. But at least we want to answer, I guess, a few big questions that I expect will come up. So off-chain execution layer 2s, which is every layer 2 that exists right now, is I guess exists in a state where some of them are interested in moving to native rollups. Some of them have kind of soft committed, depending on certain things. And we want to make it clear, especially here, that migration from an off-chain execution layer 2 to an on-chain execution layer 2 or a native rollup is possible, right? And we even expect it. So this will depend on larger layer 2s and their commitments to doing certain things, but I think I would love to see an effort from people who represent optimism, Arbitrum, etc. in this call. Let's make it clear that native rollups are not going to compete with like fraud proof systems, right? These games are ultimately something that is compatible with a migration. So yeah, let's talk about kind of launching new layer 2s. I think the important thing to touch on here is that native rollups kind of fundamentally change how I think about layer 2 design. One of them is you don't have to bootstrap a fraud-proof network. I remember on Twitter, Potas was talking about, he was replying to someone, and essentially what he was saying is that while we could fork Arbitrum and call it, ARB2, and just add an exit window. It would be a stage 2 rollup, right? But if you design it right, but the security of this theoretical ARB2 would be dramatically lower than Arbitrum, even as it is today, right? Because Arbitrum has a bunch of guardians who are watching out for their fault proving. They have a whole system of infrastructure built around the security of rollup, and so for something like launching new layer 2s, I think that's just a consideration. Cool. So let's talk about hard forking for an execute opcode. So this is the one big like community rallying point. This is the merge for native rollups. The beam chain for native rollups is we need to get the execute opcode into Ethereum through a hard fork. And obviously we need to convince all core devs. We need to write this EIP. Can't just add it without an EIP. And so this is something that we need to communicate very clearly is the goal for native rollups. We need to launch native rollups to mainnet, and to do that, we need to actually hard fork Ethereum. So that should be, I guess, a clear expectation is that our goal is not to do something like what based rollups are doing and just augment Ethereum today. It's actually to change Ethereum to provide a service execution to layer 2s. The other thing I want to talk about is kind of proving and how does staking and validating the network change? Are there any new node requirements? Are there any new testing requirements, right? I think that'll definitely be a yes. And yeah, and then of course how we think about proving, right? Are we favoring any ZK VM, right? Are we enshrining anything here? What are the I guess what are the security properties of anything that we enshrine? How do we affect Ethereum? Things like this are all questions that we need answers to. They don't have to be comprehensive, but this is not the kind of thing that we can just leave up to speculation, right? We have to get some kind of baseline agreement on these core ideas, and we can keep branching out from there. All right, that is what to expect. Do we have any thoughts on this kind of like FAQ idea or kind of ideas for educating people?
Yeah, I was thinking, so I like the benefits and the what to expect. I was thinking something more on the drawbacks side. Maybe that can fall into the what to expect bucket, because I noticed when base rollups were now coming about, they were heralded as this great thing, and then it's only later what they say, oh, you need like pre-confirmations, you need another layer for this, you need to make the L1 a little bit faster. So all of these things came out as kind of like gotchas from other people in the community. So if we could just be like upfront with the trade-offs, let's just say from the get-go, and maybe in the what to expect bucket, I think that's something that's needed.
Yeah, so, I mean, the way I tried to categorize here was like, here's why you should like native rollups, and then here's like, if you do like native rollups, you need to know this, this, and this. This may help you inform your decision as well. There are a set of drawbacks for native rollups that we should take the time to discuss. I think generally they're a net positive over off-chain ZK execution. I think or for layer 2s at least, I don't know about for Ethereum. I think there are some very serious concerns about drawbacks in terms of timelines. Like if we launch with re-execution, maybe re-execution has different trade-offs than a fully snarkified given native rollup environment. Yeah, that's a great call. We should definitely highlight that in what to expect.
I have a small comment regarding the snarkification on ZK on native rollups. As a ZK big fan, I'm really worried, and I have been saying that publicly, with the current dynamics that exist in ZK, particularly if that gets into native. I think very smart people have been working for the last 5-6 years to make ZK very fast. It's becoming very, very fast, but now there's a huge fight to go to market on on winning at the end with RISC-V VMs. I think that's going to accelerate. Literally 2 or 3 days ago, Pico Brevis launched a modification to SP1 that made things almost 2 to 3 times faster, and they were not even part of the race. So what I'm trying to say with that is that even people that didn't exist 6 months ago are the ones, like the company did exist, and I'm a huge fan of their work, but that shows you that the current trend is that things are moving very, very fast. on one thing that I'm worried about, and I'm putting quite some capital. I didn't share. I don't. Is this recorded on public? I don't know. Like if it's recorded, I cannot say the number, but we put a lot of money to find the bug in SP1. And one of the reasons we did that is because we're worried. It's not that we're just worried when we say it. It's we're putting our head some time into that, because if this becomes part of Ethereum core, the way Ethereum works by default, I think there can be a problem where if any of these ZK have a soundness bug, we will be all in a like similar situation to the DAO hack. So I'm just sharing my concerns on. I have been like trying to show it with concrete code on hacks. I think that's gonna get repeated. On also to share the incentives only to find those bugs for like 50K. The cost was way higher. So if we do that, there needs to be a clear plan. As a ZK person, I am more bullish on native on the non-ZK part, on the re-execution than on the ZK until we have a clear. And this is somebody I believe in the beam chain in ZK and all. Like it's just I'm worried because of the market dynamics.
Yeah, so you said a few really prescient things there. I think, especially around like security, there's things that we don't know now and that will 100% change in the next year, before native rollups go live. We need to be very particular and specific about kind of what ZK VMs we, include, that we require for inclusion. Is there a minimum? Do we try to formally verify one? I know we had some discussion on the first call about how should we frame like the diversity of ZK VMs? Is it important? So on and so forth. I know Justin has some changing thoughts here, so I won't comment there. But I think these questions need to be answered. I mean, I think it'd be really helpful if you, Fetty, could just write up like what is a list of the questions that we need to answer? What are like the requirements, and I guess suggestions that would be best to go about this. That'd be a great resource just for thinking about this. And then one other thing, like Beamchain is also facing the same kind of games, I guess, right? You're gonna have all of these Beamchain clients who are obviously all these ZK VMs as well for Beamchain, but they're on a much longer timeline, I hope, than native rollups, right? And so I hope we can share resources with the Beamchain effort. I mean, Justin's obviously the right guy to do that with, but figuring out how to how to be very clear about the timelines and the trade-offs at each point, especially with regards to the ZK element, is something we absolutely need to clarify. And I'd love your guidance on that. Cool.
I'm sorry. I actually had one question about what to expect. So like the whole rollup idea is to scale the Ethereum network, and like from what I understood is the execute of code will be limited by the L1's execution limit. So I think it's also important to highlight if like this is going to be something that is super scalable, like what we have current off-chain execution L2s. Otherwise, like without ZK, I just don't know like how this can be scaled without scaling the L1 itself. So yeah, this is just a general question, but also implies in the what to expect.
Yeah, that's a really good call out here. I think I'll definitely do some more thinking on that and put some writing down on paper about that. I think there's, I guess scalability is tricky because there's like a few different type of like ways you could use the execution engine opcode, and they each have their kind of different scalability trade-offs and obviously limits. And so if we're doing a native rollup, I would say, I mean, I'd be willing to say we're not going to be constrained by the execution, but rather by DA. If we're doing a optimistic layer 2 that uses the execute engine opcode for its, in its fraud-proof game, then I think it's, very likely that we will be constrained by the opcode and not by DA, right? Because we use some alt-DA for that. And so, yeah, I mean, we need to do a little bit more research on the effects of the opcode on validators before we make any strong promises about this, but I do believe that native rollups will be dramatically more scalable than Ethereum, and ultimately the only way to scale Ethereum's trust properties in the form of security to rollups. And so, if you think that doubling Ethereum's gas limit is going to be valuable for Ethereum, then that's one way that we can extend the security umbrella of Ethereum and its social contract. Or if you think native rollups can 100x that, then I think it's two sides of the same coin. Justin, do you have any thoughts on this?
One thing that comes to mind is that if you're working with an optimistic rollup and you only call the precompile in the foolproof game, then yeah, you have unbounded, effectively unbounded limit at the L2 layer, and the only limit is DA. And if you're willing to become an Optimium and have alt DA, then you're essentially unlimited there as well. So for a large class of applications that don't necessarily need the super high grade security or the super high grade composability, then Ethereum is effectively unlimited scalability.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree there. I don't think every rollup will be native, just like I don't think every rollup will be based. I definitely don't think every layer 2 will be native or based. I think there's always going to exist, high performance chains that use alt-DA, that use fraud proofs. Maybe they use the execution engine opcode at some point, as Optimiums. I just don't know. So, I'm very willing to accept the idea that we do have different kind of classes of layer 2s, different types of scalability. There's some layer 2s that maybe have dramatically higher scalability than we have today for layer 2s. I think that's a very reasonable assumption, and I think the native execution engine opcode could definitely be a part of that. I don't think that's going to be the bottleneck. Cool. So you guys are the first to hear about a new Telegram group that I have created earlier today, with the single goal of kind of filling a hole that we unfortunately do not have for base rollups. It's a place that you can ping people and get pinged and not feel bad about it, for content review. So if you're writing a draft for something about native rollups that is research on native rollups or discusses native rollups as a kind of educational content area, then this is the perfect place to do it. And like I said before, don't feel bad about pinging people. So yeah, I've just created this group. Let me just put in the main native rollup Telegram. And feel free to join. Cool. Looks like people are streaming in. Yeah, so anyway, like I said before, the goal is to provide review and feedback for educational content and research specifically about native rollups. For anyone who's watching this call on a recording and wants to get that review and feedback, then this group is open. Please reach out to me on Twitter at mteamisloading or on Telegram at mteam888. I'm sure other people will be able to invite you as well if I'm not available. Yeah, and absolutely don't feel afraid to reach out. We want this to be a resource to anyone who's doing God's work of writing for education or for research. Cool. And then I also listed out, just off the top of my head, some kind of open research areas. And so I want to just kind of run through these briefly. I think these are not very specific, and I guess some of these are more specific than the categories that they find themselves a part of. But these are just a few things I think about for research around native rollups. One of them obviously is speccing for an opcode. We need to figure out, can we put this in EIP? What do we care about in terms of how the opcode actually looks? I know Justin outlined something in his native rollup post on ETH Research, but getting something a little bit more specific here would be great. Kind of a draft EIP would be a good place to start. I know there's a group working on implementation details, who's explicitly working on this, and I'd love to continue the research there. If you're watching the recording and you'd like to contribute, this is absolutely a space that we'd love input on. For VM flexibility, this is one that there's a few people who feel strongly about, I guess. So part of this is, layer 2s, for example, have a lot of differences to the layer 1 EVM as it exists today. And so the stock EVM might not be best for them, right? Or some compromise might not be best for them. And so giving rollups the ability to, to change their VM, to add custom precompiles, to add custom opcodes is something that I personally would like to support, although possibly not with the same security assumptions as alternatives. There are, one way kind of previously suggested to do this is that the native execution engine opcode proves everything except for precompiles it's not familiar with. And then for those, you just have to bring your own prover for the rest, right? Either verify that in a layer 1 contract, use some ZK, use a fraud proof game, whatever. And this does kind of change how we think about security assumptions, but it's a way to support this. Something I don't view as a requirement for getting native rollups through, but something I know other people do. And so it's something we should definitely put a little more time into researching. Okay, cool. So single versus multiple ZKVM implementations. This is, I'm sure, something that will get discussed and debated in the future, but doing a single kind of formally verified ZKVM versus multiple different ZKVMs, which one we choose, so on and so forth, something Fedi obviously cares about, and something that I just want to make sure we get right. So yeah, let's spend more time on that. This is a big one, I think, for the staker side, is we need to figure out how much or how layer 1 gas is impacted here, and specifically how layer 1 validators and proposers and attesters, how their resource usage changes. So I imagine that re-execution faces some, presents some changes to how attesters need to kind of allocate resources for their nodes. I also believe that doing gas management on layer 1, doing EIP 1559 mechanism for native rollup gas, for some sort of gas limit. Is this something like the gas limit that can be voted on by validators, or is it something like blobs that is, as of now, kind of a protocol parameter? So yeah, a place that there's a broad umbrella, I guess, around research we need to do into kind of modifications for stakers and kind of what to expect on the layer 1 level. Another one is proving improvers. So how do we think about incentivization for provers? And this is like specifically at block proposal time. Once a block has been proposed, do we need a proof from the proposer? Do we need a proof from, from entities that are elected by Ethereum? Probably not. Do we want, proving to be permissionless? I think ideally, but we need to think about that in terms of incentivization. So I think one way that people think about this is that proving will be incentivized just through altruism, right? So if we have one honest prover somewhere in the world, then that should be enough. And ideally, we'll just have lots of layer 2 teams, lots of research teams running these. Something we just need to be very clear we have the right assumptions about. The other one related to that, around proving at least, is kind of proving latency and proving costs. How much does proving cost? What hardware do you need to prove? Is it a requirement that you can prove it on a next generation MacBook Pro? Questions we should be asking. In terms of another interesting one, I think migration is one that we absolutely need to get right, around technical, of course. So how do we actually just swap out fraud proofs for execution engine opcode, and also incentives. So what exists in terms of community pressures? Are there bounties that teams are willing to put up for rollups actually becoming native? So yeah, let's get some feedback on here. Do we have any thoughts on open research? Would anyone like to, I guess, volunteer to put some time into any of these? That'd be great. All right, we can come back to that. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Apologies.
Yeah, sorry, I just did it at the same time. Does anyone have any ideas about how much additional resources will be needed for re-execution?
So my concrete proposal would be to have a tiny gas limit initially for re-execution, something maybe nominal, like 1 million gas. And the reason is that it would unlock, at the very least, the optimistic rollups with unlimited gas limit, because they can just call the execute precompile in the foolproof game in 1 million gas increments. It's possible for technical reasons that 1 million is the wrong number because there's some sort of edge case that I'm not thinking about, and just more convenient to have 10 million, for example, but something small would be sufficient to unlock at the very least the optimistic rollups.
Right, so then this would mean that the testers will not need any additional hardware requirements from what they have right now.
Yes, especially that the hardware usage today is more likely than not, the hardware is underutilized, and the reason is that if EVM execution is single-threaded and you have a multi-core CPU, then you might not be using all of your cores, and it's relatively easy to parallelize verification of the execute precompile.
Yeah, that's a good one, Justin. I think the additional, well, at least for like a native rollup, that uses Ethereum for DA, you're not gonna have greater bandwidth requirements, right? And I don't think you will have, dramatic changes to state depending on how the opcode is designed. But I think your biggest one is just going to be execution and CPU cycles. And as of now, that is definitely an underutilized resource for a lot of hardware setups. And so something I feel comfortable with. One thing that I personally imagine as a direction that may be useful is getting the opcode into Fusaka or the fork after that, with a gas limit of like 0. So it's like effectively useless. But then and setting some like protocol defined threshold for activating that without requiring a hard fork. And it's something that I imagine could be just a way to get the on-chain interface done without having to increase validator hardware requirements at all. So yeah, I don't know, something I've been thinking about.
I think to get it into Fusaka, you likely need an EIP very soon, and then to like put it up for inclusion quite soon.
Agreed. Yeah, I mean, Fusaka, I guess it's still not clear to me when Fusaka will actually happen. I know there are people that want it to be a small fork and some who want it to be a very large fork. And I'm not tapped into the ACDC process enough to understand like which camp is winning at the moment. So yeah, but I definitely agree. There's a sense of urgency here.
I had one question about the ZK version. So does that require delayed execution in order to give the prover enough time to actually create these proofs?
Do you mean for like state root computation?
Just to create the ZK VM proofs?
So
yeah.
I mean, I think the how I would kind of rephrase your question is do we need serial calculation delay, which is another EIP, to get some of these properties? And I would say the answer is no. What we're doing is moving the verification of the opcode's execution into the attestation stage of the block, right? And of course, this is independently verifiable by anyone running a node, and who's able to re-execute if they want to see, what's going on. They don't need to wait for proofs. The proofs are just for consensus. And so in that regard, like, you don't need to, here's how I would put it. To check the validity of a block from within the EVM, if you're doing things like composability, you need to know that your state transition of the native rollup was valid. You don't need to have delayed execution. You can just consider the opcode kind of executed. If your EVM code, maybe you're another contract doing composability, if that actually gets finalized on Ethereum, then that means the whatever happened in the native rollup state transition must have been valid. So I guess it was a confusing way of explaining it, but your local perspective of the current Ethereum block is, I guess, is not dependent on delayed execution. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I think you're saying that if the block is seen as valid, you can assume that the execute function, if I was to verify the proof that came with the execute function, it would verify true. My question was more around the time to create these proofs, and it seems like you're saying you can just ignore the proof.
From what I understand, you don't need to, but you want to. So it's not it depends on the block time, on the relationship between the block time of DEL2, the proving time. But you don't have to do it. It's just like you want to do it so that the block can be produced, even if the proving is not yet done. I don't know if I'm explaining myself correctly, but what I'm trying to say is like, you don't need logically to have delayed execution, but you want to have it, like, so that the block production on DEL1 is not delayed by the proving, and you can have more time to prove, because also the proving, the bigger the size of what you're proving, the better, because in most cases it's log square of n or log n, or like, so the bigger the better. TLDR, you don't need it, you want it.
Right. Okay, I see. So the validity of the block is not dependent on those proofs that come with it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the key about off-chain proofs, is that the validity of the block, or even the finality of the block, when we start to get attestations, is not going to be dependent on those proofs. So, yeah. Just to kind of summarize here, I think one of the major benefits of native rollups is that our proving time can be longer than real time, can be up to the slot time or close to it, because we can start generating those proofs after the Ethereum block is proposed, and then we have some wiggle room for sure when it comes to proving latency. 12 seconds isn't a long time for proving by any means, but it's a lot better than like 200 milliseconds. Cool. Good.
One more potential benefit I feel worth to explore is how revenue model may change with native rollups, at least with the re-execution. It sort of falls into incentive section, but one of the big concerns in community currently that existing layer 2s do not contribute enough revenue to layer 1, and if native rollups may change the picture, at least with the re-execution, I would mark it as a benefit.
Yeah, I'll give you my own personal opinion. I think it's important for Ethereum to focus on value creation and not value accrual at this current point in time. I believe native rollups are a way to export Ethereum security, and align themselves pretty well with the kind of like ETH-centric rollup-centric roadmap that we want to support. I think it is theoretically possible to enshrine ETH as the gas token of native rollups, if you really wanted to. I don't think that's something that makes a ton of sense, but yeah, at the end of the day, I think native rollups could slightly change the short-term value growth for Ethereum in terms of like, I guess revenue isn't the right word, but like ETH burned, or gas fees contributed to validators.
But at the same time, and this was in Justin's post, at the same time, the value distribution today also pays for a lot of stuff, and I think that's a question maybe in open research areas, maybe in like a the what to expect on the potential downside. If we're not doing that as much, and if we are bringing, if we are trying to minimize governance, which I don't know if that's actually a goal here, because the initial execute notion, right, doesn't totally minimize governance. But if you're trying to minimize governance, and you're trying to remove power from the people running existing rollups, and is that going to devalue the governance tokens that are used for grants and that are presently trying to grow in importance and grow in value? And this was in Justin's post, but I think that's kind of another question of like, if you're trying to get something that's like better in these ways, who's going to pay for it, basically?
Yeah, I mean, the governance token is ultimately tangential to the security. I think like you can have a governance vote, whether to migrate to or from being a native rollup. I think that's something that is not excluded by being native or using the precompiler for something. I think rollups will have a diverse set of like value accrual mechanisms. Some will have a governance token for protocol upgrades. Some of them will have first party applications. So we had app chains. I think we'll have chain apps. I don't know. I see this being a set of models that is not going to be excluded or limited or constrained by native rollups.
But just to pity on that a little, if you have upgrades that are needed now to support a variety of things that will go away, and those upgrades are driven by governance that has tokens involved, and people are really passionate about being able to prevent those upgrades from hurting things, and the governance token is really part of that. If you remove all of that, if you say there's no governance required now in an extreme case, then at least in that case you would affect the value of assets and what people have put time and money into building. Like, it would hurt the value of the governance token if you didn't need it anymore, even if that's better overall.
Can I jump in? I think there's nothing preventing like existing L2s that migrate to become a native rollup from upgrading like as a native rollup. I think what you're actually getting at is if you're not just delegating like consensus security, but like the execution layer security to validators, like maybe your point is that like if they can't continue to experiment, they effectively, there's no reason to upgrade. And so that sort of devalues the governance token in a sense. So I mean, I would say like the execute precompiler should be designed in a way where they could continue to experiment on execution, and then if they want to, they can migrate, like deploy a new contract on L1 and have some kind of upgrade mechanism and use new precompiles, etc. So I don't know, is that sort of what your concern is, like the execution experimentation side, or is it something different?
I think in part, I mean, I just think it's sold, right, as a benefit, like security councils, right? Like that's the thing that everyone doesn't like those are bad. And this is sold as being like a way of avoiding them, because you don't need to keep these upgradable contracts. You don't need to keep upgrading them. And the generalized version of the security council is governance and the people involved in that and the tokens involved in that. And so, I believe in this, but is the native rollup movement a movement that is a movement about governance minimization, and then governance minimization, then that has other costs? Or is this movement basically saying, security councils are fine, DAOs running things are fine, but here's another way to do it? My personal view is that it should be a governance minimization movement, but I think that is a big change from where the power exists today, basically.
Yeah, Tom. I think I'm obviously not a dictator on this matter at all, but I think as a movement, we should attempt to remain neutral on anything that is like this tangential to the execution engine opcode itself. I believe that we want to create better ways to do governance minimization, right? So if you want sustained compatibility with Ethereum and you want governance minimization or ossification, then we want to create that option, and this does create that option. But making moral judgments on is this correct or better or good, I think is something we should avoid. But yeah, that's just my personal opinion. One thing I'll add about upgrades is that governance tokens can control a lot more than just like execution. So I think probably the best example is around sequencing. To choose the sequencing for a chain is an exceptionally valuable thing, right? Centralized sequencers could capture millions of dollars. They even do in practice today. And if they were extractive for MEV, they could, get a lot more out of the chains that they sequence. And so governance tokens, if you want to speculate that their value is based on, the revenue that they could extract from a chain by making decisions about it, then I think sequencing is something that is actually going to be dramatically more important than execution. But maybe that's just me.
Just to press you on this a little bit though, right? Like you've got to make moral judgments at some point. Like today, if you look at all of the super chains, not to call it the super chain, just randomly, right? All of them can be shut down like with 15 signatures. And I would say, I'm willing to say that's not good, right? And so is that not good or is that fine? And then, okay, if that's not good, then is having them all powered by a market cap token, having them rest on the attackability of a token whose market cap is 2 billion or 10 billion or something, is that fine? So I just think we got to be able to say some things are good and some things are bad if we're going to convince people, right? We have to say secure, 15 signatures is too few. In fact, you should never be able to shut down a good roll up. I mean, right? Or I don't know, I'm trying to pin you down a little bit.
I want to like separate my personal opinion from that of the movement as a whole and for native rollups. I personally believe that that security councils, stage 1 rollups are a stepping stone and training wheels for what rollups eventually will be. I think that it is dangerous to I guess dangerous to frame like the security councils are good argument as security councils are good forever. I would try to make it much more clear that I think people who are advocating for security councils, people who are on those security councils, major layer 2s, are looking especially at using the security councils until other forms of government administration perhaps or security are available. And so perhaps this ends up being a timeline debate like everything else in crypto. Does it make sense to move away from a security council now, or does it make sense to wait? And I guess I'm not sure how strongly people feel about this, but I do think that it is better to launch with a security council than to not launch at all, right? For something like
there's going to be an infinite range of trade-offs for layer 2s and rollups, and I think that some will migrate for reasons that they're losing market share, and some will decide not to, right? Because of again, like I think it's strange that people were seemingly so surprised by the Sony enterprise chain, right? Like representing kind of the enterprise side here and the finance side. Most banks are in the future and fintechs are going to have rollups. They probably won't be native, right? But they're going to have entirely opposite spectrum of trade-offs and risk assumptions, these types of assumptions than a maximally, public and permissionless native or even ultrasound rollup. And so I think I would just have keep a wide aperture in terms of this. And I think I agree with Matthew. We shouldn't be too judgmental in the short term, especially.
Yeah. Agreed there. I think Kev, you put something in the chat. I think in an ideal world, we wouldn't need security councils, right? And I agree with that. I think the question is, do we live in an ideal world? And when can we get to that ideal? When can we get to good enough, right? I think native rollups are a way there. I would agree. We don't want security councils in an ideal world. We shouldn't need them and wouldn't need them, but I want to actually make that happen. Cool. So let's go to the next slide here. I want to talk about native rollups, the future. So I have some milestones laid out here. This is the last slide, and we're just going to finish up this section, and specifically talk about kind of how I see milestones playing out for native rollups. It's my personal kind of opinion here. I want to write an EIP for the execute opcode. Obviously, to do this, we need to agree on what the opcode should include. Max, can you please make this happen? We need to write code to use that execute opcode as the execution for a rollup. So this, can happen on a testnet for sure. It can happen without execute opcode actually existing. But I just want to, make sure we're getting there. These are not necessarily in order, by the way. I want to get an EIP on testnets. So obviously public testnets, but also some devnets. And of course, approved by all core devs. For Fusaka, cross your fingers. But, I think more likely for the fork after that. And then of course the big milestone is Ethereum hard forks to support native rollups. I think this will happen. I really hope it will happen. And that is our most important milestone. And then after that, I expect to see a blossoming of native rollups. So we'll see the first native rollup, and then from there, I expect we'll see migrations and new rollups launching as native. So yeah, these are my set of milestones here. We are over time on the call, so I'm going to open it up for just a couple more minutes of questions, and then we're going to stop recording and go to the private segment.
I'll just ask a quick question. I think, first of all, this looks great. I agree with it. I know I'm, trying to push some buttons a moment ago, but I will ask this on the roadmap. If we zoom back, right, there's this question of like the execute opcode, and that's going to help us verify the EVM. But the roll-up state transition function includes more than just the EVM. There's a bunch of other stuff. There's all this, debate on that. And so, for me, from my perspective, if you have the ability for the L1 to verify the entire state transition function, that means you don't need the upgradable smart contracts for the bridge, which means you're done. We're in paradise. But if you only have verification on the EVM side, you still need the upgradable smart contracts. You're not quite in paradise yet, even though it's pretty good. So I agree that obviously you don't want to do everything at once, but is the roadmap and is the plan to get to what I would call paradise, or how do you think about that?
I do believe that this is another thing that we want to provide optionality on. I want to make it possible to ossify everything. So your bridge contract, your EVM state transition, complete ossification, right? And we theoretically could do this today. I think there's a lot of great reasons why we don't, because there's no perfect rollups. The security assumptions of existing rollups are not very good for the most part. And so I think native rollups are a necessary step to getting good ossification with the security of Ethereum, and explicitly like future proofing for layer 1 compatibility. And if you think that's valuable, then I think native rollups are the only way to get that. That's something you should support, but it's not the only way, right? Like you could set up some off-chain system of proving without being native, and have a really great rollup that is ossified all of this, but without native. So yeah, a lot of things there. Cool. Do we have any thoughts just to close this out?
I have a question. Like in the case of base rollups, I see why somebody would not want to be based. In the case of native, apart from the Security Council, is there any other criticism or potential reason why somebody wouldn't want to be native? I'm just trying to understand the optic from somebody that could like have criticism. I cannot see many criticisms to native rollups, and I want to see if anybody has any, because yeah, people were asking like if I tend to think it's not gonna be very, I don't know if the word's in English, polemic, or like it's not gonna be like something that yeah, I want to see if there's anything I'm missing.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I think is always going to be a question is the like activation cost or complexity. Like how much does it cost to like put Ethereum resources into this? Is that worth it? I think that is a drawback that needs to be considered. It also needs to be considered, like, will layer 2s end up switching? Like, are the benefits actually good enough? Are we just going to waste a lot of layer 1 time? I don't know, but I would see that as one criticism that I've seen shopped around. I don't know if other people have seen some other ones as well.
I think there's some scaling questions that we need to answer for this, especially if we're doing strict native only. I don't know, but I have a suspicion that we might end up with hybrid native solutions on L2s that are extremely high activity that's not cross-chain.
And by that you mean like a Optimium?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, where they're basically interleaving native interop blocks with, you know, fast calculation of only local state, and then settling the local state updates before the next native block.
Yeah.
I mean, I see this being a complicated landscape for different types of L2 uses. And if the limitations of building on the L1 end up restricting the throughput for the L2s, they're not going to want to go full reliance on the L1.
Agreed.
So, and I'd like to have solutions that still allow them to participate.
Right. Yeah. So just to summarize, we have cost and complexity of migrating and shipping this to Ethereum is going to slow down Fusaka, stuff like that. And we have scalability, especially with trade-offs. Like, what are the trade-offs around certain points on the scalability spectrum? And Lottie, did you have something else?
Not to this point, but to a different one. So if you want to finish this, then I'd continue.
No, go ahead, please.
Okay. Yeah, so just quickly switching gears in terms of bringing this to mainnet. So I wanted to just share with the group maybe a learning from the Fossil EIP, and like one good argument for why Fossil made it into Fusaka, for example, was the design of the EIP was based on extensibility. So like when I heard Kev and Justin earlier talk about, hey, let's start minimal here. We have all this debate about re-execution versus the K version. So just wanted to share this idea that maybe there's a good chance that a native rollup EIP can be structured similarly. That so we start with a very lightweight variant and extend it later on.
Yeah, I think that potentially manifests itself in doing re-execution before doing full ZK. I mean, or enshrining something with a very, very low gas limit is another way to kind of just experiment with some of the stuff before activating it. I think maybe say something a little spicy. I think the all core devs process is something we want to be involved with as little as possible, and get one EIP through, and then do everything else just with EIP 1559 gas limit style upgrade where validators can vote. That's something I'd really like to push. And Kev, yeah, I mean, that's a great call out. I don't want to promise anything, nor do I want to speculate strongly about timelines for native rollups, or even about inclusion at all. And so if you are writing educational resources or research, it'd be great to avoid speculating on inclusion in Fusaka, I guess, as a starting point. And I'd love to get more feedback from core devs. If you know any core devs, if you are a core dev, then please let us know how you're thinking about this. That's all the time we have for today for this call. I'm gonna stop recording, and we're gonna take this offline just to discuss any any additional things that we have not covered so far publicly. If anyone else is interested in getting into the native rollup Telegram, then please message me on Twitter, message Justin. There's a variety of people that can help you with that. And we would love to get you involved with this, get you in these calls, get your feedback. I also talked about this content group for review. And if you are interested in participating in that, then again, please reach out to me, and I will add you. And yeah, hopefully we can get some content out there in in a structured way in the next few weeks to months. All right, thank you everyone for coming. Goodbye. And we're done. Thanks, Matt.